Honestly, I have no idea what to really say about this anime. For the first time, I am at a loss for words. And it's not because of the over-the-top violence and gore, because that's what I went into this wanting and expecting. No, I am mostly mute for comments because I have no idea what I just watched. This was the most incoherent and confusing anime I think I have ever experienced. And going into research where the idea for this actually came from, come to find out Genocyber is actually based on a manga, but a manga that consists of only one single volume and whose story was never completed. Obviously. So what's the best thing to do with an incomplete manga with a story as elaborate and complex as it seems like it wants to be? Well, make it into a 5-episode anime OVA, of course. So I've been making my way through many anime films of the 80s and 90s to make reviews for because I absolutely adore the style and aesthetics of this time period in the anime world, and I lament that animation can no longer look like this. Many of these films I watched when I was way too young to be seeing them, but it made me awaken into a whole new world of animation and storytelling that my young, expanding mind and horny teenage body was absolutely nuts over. But anime in this era was very hard to obtain. You were basically limited to what the small back corner section of Blockbuster had available and needed to cross that barrier of judgment from those thinking you were just there to rent some hentai. But this anime in particular, Genocyber, was one that I have never seen until now. I had heard of its legacy from time to time, I've seen some clips, but I never got a chance to actually watch it until earlier today. And considering my 33-year-old adult self had no idea what was going on, I could not imagine what I would have thought of this at 13. I'd probably have to take a long walk into the forest, find a lake, lay down next to it without food or water for a few days, and try to come to terms with the absolute insanity that had just penetrated my eyes and ears. That's because Genocyber is legendary for one reason and one reason only, being one of the most violent and brutal anime to come out during this time period, especially when it comes to its death and gore scenes. The fact that nobody is safe. Men, women, children, it does not matter. If you exist at all within this cyberpunk science fiction series, you are up on the chopping block to be destroyed. People are killed and gutted in a variety of ways, and this anime hides nothing when it comes to showing the inner guts of somebody spilling out onto the floor, or a man that's had his body completely ripped open. There's death by regular weapons like guns, death by machines, death by worms in some dude's head that aren't really there but he thinks they are, death by tentacles. Yes, you are not free from tentacles in this movie either, I'm sorry. But despite all of this, while watching this movie, the gore didn't really disturb or excite me that much at all. And I think a large part of that is me not really caring about what was happening on screen. See, I love gore in anime movies when it's done well. I love it in a movie like Ninja Scroll, and I even liked it in Legend of the Overfiend, which is basically just a hardcore hentai with demons. I actually like that movie a lot, strangely enough, the more I think about it. I reviewed it last week. I'll link it down below. But anyway, the fundamental difference between the gore in that movie and the gore here in Genocyber is that the sheer ridiculousness of Overfiend lended itself to that over-the-top violence and insanity that was happening, and it fully embraced into that hyper-violence that it became almost comedic at times. But Genocyber takes itself a little bit too seriously for its own good, and I don't even know what it's supposed to be serious about. And if it's just here for the gore, then yeah, that's cool, that's in here, but that, along with the aesthetic, is about all it's going to have to offer you. And don't get me wrong, the aesthetic is awesome. It was released in 1994, but everything about it just screams the 80s. It has that vibe that you can tell was inspired by Blade Runner, Alien, Mad Max, and a bunch of other classic films. The creatures look dirty and grimy, mixing their robotic parts with human flesh, and the transformations from one creature into another or how they expand can be some pretty nightmare-inducing shit. But aside from that, what is this OVA actually about? Well, As far as I can tell, it takes place beginning in the near future where technology has advanced, and the beginning deals a lot with this mad scientist character, which I loved. I love mad scientists in movies and shows. We really need more mad scientists out there. Just putting that out there. If you're writing a story right now, put in a mad scientist. Anyway, he's doing these experimentations to push the boundaries of cyborg capabilities, and in doing so, he's incredibly abusive to his daughters that he basically uses as his guinea pigs. One barely has any physical body parts left of her own, and the other is a much younger girl with all these weird psychic abilities, but isn't really all there when it comes to being able to communicate. She's kind of feral. She's also constantly escaping, which I guess leads to jealousy in the other sister, whose main source of transportation is this mech suit that can absolutely eviscerate people. Yeah. But at one point, the two sisters merge their souls, I guess, and it creates this thing called Genocyber, which is an even more powerful mech cyborg creature thing that just wonderfully kills the fuck out of some other cyborgs in this amazing battle sequence at the end of the first episode, and then lays waste to the entirety of the city of Hong Kong. After that, what happens in the story is, well, your guess is as good as mine. It seems like each subsequent episode after the first one takes place a little bit farther ahead in time, which is an idea I quite like. It's just that the story and characters aren't really strong enough to back it up here. Like, I do like the thought of what if this godlike being existed on Earth? What would the Earth's reaction be to it? How long would it survive? Would this be an endless war, or would its powers be able to end war forever? But these ideas aren't explored enough to get any good answers. Episode 2 begins with children being blown apart, which is quite a way to start an episode. Fun ride for the whole family. But from here, it looks like people are fighting against Genocyber, even though it can now transform back into the psychic girl, but it's still merged with her sister, I think. I don't really know. But at one point, these people try to experiment on its arm, which just transforms into a giant tentacle creature, wiping out a bunch of soldiers in a bizarrely creative way, but not the way that you think tentacles would traditionally act. And actually, now might be a good time to mention that despite the relentless violence and gore in this OVA, there's practically no sexual scenes at all. Well, unless you count that one shot where the camera is looking out of a vagina from the inside. Yeah. There's an attempted grape earlier on that stopped before it gets started, and I think in episode 3 or 4, two characters have sex, but it cuts away just as they're about to begin, and then cuts back after it's over. Which I was a little surprised to know that in an anime that gets away with so much that they didn't even attempt any sexy scenes. I mean, there's so much blood, but we can't get one nice shot of some good anime titties. That's what's really wrong with this movie. But speaking of, the next few episodes go farther into the future and focus on this couple trying to make ends meet in this now post-apocalyptic-like future. The girl is blind, and the guy is doing his best to get money so that they can escape from their current situation. And this storyline completely separates itself from the first few, and I kind of didn't mind because the first few were so convoluted and all over the place that I kind of liked this direction a little bit more as it focused on these characters, which I kind of understood to a degree, until the boy gets tricked into murdering somebody by throwing knives into him. Yeah, that's a thing that happens. And then they wind up being fugitives on the run for a while. But then how does all that tie back into Genocyber? Well, in this point in time, Genocyber is deep underground, lying dormant while being worshipped by this crazy fanatical religious cult until the blind girl causes it to reawaken, where it comes to life and basically does what it does best and destroys everything. If I wanted to look deeper into this for some reason other than its surface level style and gore, I guess maybe the idea of Genocyber being a result of pain and torment in order to achieve something, the human girls being disregarded by their father for his pursuit of his ambitions, which then turns into this godlike destroyer, is kind of like the price you pay for an ambition too great. It's sort of like Icarus flying too close to the sun, and it's cathartic vengeance for creating something without any sense of love or empathy for those you're creating it with. The fact that it goes on to have a place within wars in other countries is maybe a warning sign to all humanity about the dangers of pushing technology too far. Maybe kind of like Godzilla in his messaging, it shows that eventually if you push too far, something will push back. I also have to give an incredible amount of credit to the soundtrack. The score in this movie is really phenomenal. It really helps ramp up the action scenes once they take place. And I think there's a ton of creativity on display with how the OVA looks, how the action is directed, and how the kills and gore are animated, and even some of the weird story choices like adding in some live action shots on occasion. But when it comes to the story and characters, it really falls flat because, well, there kind of is no real story. The first episode sets things up okay enough, but then it does this jumping ahead approach, which is a neat idea, like I said, but each episode doesn't really connect to the previous one enough for it to feel cohesive. Instead, it feels more like they were just throwing ideas at the wall, finding ways to come up with the next gore scene, and then needing to wrap all of it up without having much there to work with in the end. Overall, I'm not sure if I could really recommend this movie, other than just if it's your raw curiosity about what makes it so legendary, that being the gore and violence that it has. But it doesn't really have an emotional core that gives any of it any weight, and its tone is very serious with itself, that it also doesn't lend itself to being so over the top that it becomes fun to watch with how ridiculous it is. Instead, it stays somewhere in the middle and flirts with both ideas, but doesn't carve much of an identity of its own beyond just the surface level thrills. But if that's all you need to have a good time, then by all means, jump into this wild mess of an OVA and go experience yourself some Genocyber. Thanks for watching this video, guys. I really do appreciate it. I don't know if you know, but I do have an entire playlist of anime reviews, many of which are going back and reviewing the classic and infamous anime movies of the 80s and 90s, so would really appreciate it if you check that out and gave it a like while you're there. Also, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. Also, if you want to help support the channel, you can check out the links below for my Patreon and merch store. Even as low as $1 a month would be super helpful, and I would greatly appreciate it. Other than that, guys, thanks again for watching. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time.